everyone. Welcome to What's Wrong with the Podcast. We hope you're all safe and well and hope today's discussion will be a slight distraction from all the scary news and you will get informed and inspired. Today, we have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Ernst Wagner. Dr. Wagner is a lecturer and researcher at the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich. His research explores on visual literacy, international cooperation, intercultural communication, heritage education, art history, and education for sustainable development. Ernst studied art education at the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich and exhibited in Germany and the United States. He graduated with a Ph.D. in art history at Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, minoring philosophy and ethnology. He taught visual arts at secondary schools for several years. He was employed by the Institute for School Quality and Research in Education in Munich. From 2009 and 2018, he worked as an executive coordinator at the UNESCO Chair in Arts and Culture in Education. He is an honorary professor at the Hong Kong University of Education. He has published over 300 books and chapters in 8 languages. Hello.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Well, nice to have you. Can you tell us about yourself and your background?
My background is little bit complicated. You see, I have a little bit complicated biography. So when I was a young man, I studied art, visual art at the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich, and did a lot of sculpturing and exhibiting my sculptures. But then I changed my approach to life, and I think it would good to do something with other people. So I changed my profession and I taught visual art at schools primarily, and this led me to a lot of very interesting and very exciting experiences with my students. And then I changed again my position after teaching at schools. I was chosen by the government to be involved in curriculum development at a specific institute where they developed this curricula, and I did there, and it has again a very interesting experiences with all this kind of work. And then I changed again my position, and I was asked by the chairholder of the UNESCO chair in Arts and Cultural Education at German University to work with him and to coordinate the international work of this UNESCO chair. And so I worked there for 10 years. And at the moment, I'm at the Academy of Fine Arts. I came back to the place where I started. And I'm now in teacher training, in training teachers for art education, visual art education.
Amazing. Well, I love diverse backgrounds, so great to see you jumped onto different things. So let's talk about art's current state in, I guess, the field of education all around. Do you think we are exposed to arts enough in education? And my likely guess is no. I guess globally there could have been more exposure, but why do you think we don't see it enough yet? And why is that a problem too? Why is arts in education so important for not only growing youth, but also for us as generally as a society?
Well, I cannot totally agree with you.
Great to know.
Because I think it always depends on what kind of art education you have. So it's the question of quality of art education. If it doesn't mean that we just have to think about hours or time that we dedicate to art education, for instance, in our school systems. The main issue is the question of quality of what kind of art education. And what I think is most important at the moment is to address in art education not only the self-development of individuals, just to be creative, just to express yourself. This is fine. Yeah, but this cannot be everything. I think something is missing if we only concentrate on this self-development or self-formation of the individual. So I think we have to address also societal and, for instance, also ecological issues in arts education. And if we miss this, I think we lose our role in the educational system. So I think the main question is, how can we convince our educators to address these issues in a good way, so that really have their students with them participating in projects that are related to this societal and ecological issues. Then it's then asking always for time, or money.
Always, yeah. And so why, I'm really interested in that. And why do you say that? Why do we need arts to also focus on environmental and societal matters? How do you think art will help? And having such arts education that will expose us to that thinking, how can that help us as a society?
This is a very difficult issue, and we don't really know yet how everything works. But we are trying to address these issues in our projects. So perhaps we start from the background. This question of that arts education should be involved in these societal issues has a background also in, for instance, in UNESCO policies. For instance, there's a very interesting document, the so-called Soul Agenda. This is a document from 2010, and all UNESCO member states agreed that this is the most important document in respect to arts education. And there you have three pillars in this document. And one is that arts education has to address the daily challenges, the everyday challenges. And I think ecological and societal issues are very relevant if you look at today's challenges. So I think this is the one point. If you look at the background, just to make this even stronger than it is only my personal position. And the second point is that we have at the moment within the United Nations a big discussion about education for sustainable development. And this education for sustainable development addresses a lot of goals which are very relevant in further development of our societies. And I think we really have to connect with these discussions. That's so this is, I think, the first point what I would like to stress, that we have to connect arts education to these discussions. This is it's not about helping.
Right.
So to be aware of that, arts education cannot be isolated from what is going around everywhere. But to have this connection to these relevant discussions, discourses in the world, I think this is the very first point, that we are aware of this. You see, I'm just slipping around to avoid a direct answer.
But I sympathize with that, because we see the same thing in architecture, right? Like architecture as having such a domain in our cities and such a presence. Like anywhere we look at, we see architecture. Yet, you know, we feel like maybe not in the educational space itself, but in architectural practices, there is very few implementation of, you know, being responsive or to urban, social, or environmental problems. And we see, you know, sustainable architecture is now becoming more and more promoted globally. But yet there are still, it's a very lagging conversation in other aspects where, you know, architecture could also be great in raising awareness around social issues, but it's not necessarily doing so, or it is not exploring all the urban issues in the interdisciplinarity that it should be exploring. Sometimes architects have really their like own view and they remain in their bubble, and when they ideate with each other, and then this doesn't get out to the mass, and therefore it's a very isolated conversation. So I definitely understand what you're saying in terms of like arts education cannot be here and all the sustainable development goals cannot be here. Like arts could be a vessel to raise awareness. I can't think of anything. I mean, maybe what is another like self-expression method, like fashion, maybe, but like arts also is such a dominant presence without us realizing within our lives. I mean, there's a reason why also, uh, Instagram is so popular. Like visuality in the end has such strong appeal to us as humans. So having a visual domain to be able to raise awareness, educate people, or connect people somehow is really, really powerful. So I see your point in why they have to be more emerged. So it was actually like
but if you're addressing architecture, I think this is very interesting because I see a natural bridge between art education and architecture. We have this, I think that it was a book that was told, the title of this book was Architecture as the Third Teacher.
Okay.
I don't know whether you know this.
No.
But I think this is interesting to see architecture not just as architecture that is to be used, but to really interpret architecture as a teacher. He teaches people. Architecture is teaching people. And architecture influences behaviors, influences the way how we perceive things, influences everything, how we act and react in the spaces we live in. Mm-hmm. So, and this is a kind of education, and that's why I think architecture is a very good example of what I want to address also in art education. Perhaps I have to say something about art education, because in English we always use this term art education, which is a global term. If you look, for instance, at UNESCO, they are using also this expression of art education. But if you look in specific countries or regions of the world, they have totally different concepts of what art education is. So some of them, they are really focusing on what we have, what we address when we have used the Western concept of visual art, which is a totally different concept than, for instance, of teaching art in communities somewhere in Africa or in New Zealand with first people, indigenous people in indigenous cultures. So they are totally different concepts of what we can call art education. And this means that if we look at art education, we have to first define what it is, like architecture. So if we understand architecture in the sense that it is the space that influences the people, then I would like to address art education as something which deals with the visual world. So in Germany, we have a German term which we use for our didactics when we teach art education. So it is called Bildkompetenz, which means competences in imagery, or if you use a more international term, then it is visual literacy.
Okay.
And this visual literacy, for instance, in our curriculum, we include, for instance, architecture as well, or we include design as well, or we include everyday aesthetics as well. How do we dress? What is fashion? So we address a lot of more things than just art, which is something which you can find in a museum or in a gallery. And this shows again exactly that there is a natural bridge between arts education and these societal or ecological issues we mentioned before. Because if you are addressing, for instance, design or architecture, or daily life aesthetics, then immediately ecological issues come in, or also societal issues come in.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think there are a lot of natural bridges between what, in my understanding, art education is, and all these societal things. But we have really to address this as a societal issue. It's not only about isolating the aesthetic values, or, for instance,
Yeah.
the development of forms. We have, when we teach, for instance, history of architecture, we can say, okay, what was the development of the modernist forms from Bauhaus over
Yeah.
to New York School, and so on and so on, and what is postmodern.
Yeah.
It's just talking about form. That's how it often happens.
Yeah.
But we can also ask which kind of architecture answers which challenges of the societies. And this, if we address this in this way, then I think we automatically address these societal issues.
I mean, it also helps the field itself, no? I feel like by, creating our own jargons and having our own insular conversations, like architects to architects, or musicians to musicians, or artists to artists, like it is very much perceived also in those fields are a little bit elitist, and like there's a disconnect from general mass. Whereas, well, as you're saying, there is such a huge opportunity and value that all these professions and disciplines can be doing for the environment and society. Like, do you think asking these relevant questions and connecting them to current times and really societal matters or environmental matters will also help the field itself to be more relatable to not only general mass or younger populations too? Because like we see this in, for example, classical music. Like if you go to a concert, the average age is really high and it doesn't necessarily always appeal to a younger demographic. Or we see this at museums sometimes too. Like being more in tune with the global matters that really are relevant to our society as a general. Do you think that will also uh, indirectly or directly help the field itself to be more accessible to all?
Yes, I totally agree with you. This is what we experience at the moment. If you look at this, for instance, this movement, Fridays for Future. So this is a movement started by Greta Thunberg from Sweden. She alone started this movement by not going to school on Friday. And she said, this is a school strike. And she went
Mm-hmm.
with a poster to the parliament in Sweden, in Stockholm. And she said, this is my Friday for Future, and that was school strike to make awareness about the ecological issues we are facing at the moment, because it is our world. And Greta Thunberg, she's quite popular at the moment.
Yeah.
She gave a speech at the United Nations, which was incredible from
Yes,
my
she's
point of view.
amazing. Yeah.
She said to these world leaders, "How dare you?" And this was so impressive from my point of view. And I think if you look at these movements, and we have a lot of people joining this movement, also in, for instance, in Germany, not at the moment because of the Corona crisis. But we had this a very strong movement at our schools, and this is the experience I have, that young people are asking these questions. How do we deal with this, for instance, ecological issues? And they make us, our generation, the older one, they make us responsible for this. And that's why I think this kind of movement supports in a very good way um, our intentions really to address these issues, also in any kind of education, but also in art education, because I'm responsible for art education. I'm not responsible for general education or for music education.
Yeah. um but to your point too, I guess, like, considering what happened in the past that got us here, and like, why are we in this like climate crisis, or why are we facing a pandemic in 2020 where governments still very much poorly respond? Or forget governments, people also, like, we're also guilty of like not reacting at the right time because we really didn't understand how an epidemic or pandemic works. Like, countries that actually have been through this recently have more collective memory of what are the collective risks, and they were better at flattening the curve, right? So we also are not educated in our history, like I guess, and we forget easily, we're resilient, we adapt. So because we forget all the bad things in the past, which is a good thing for survival, but we also, it causes us not to be prepared enough or not being responsible enough, whether that is for public health or for environment. So as much as art also could help us to be more aware of current issues, do you also think through arts education we could also educate people on our histories better? Like, I think art history sometimes always is also put in a different bubble, but at the same time, as visual tools, as you mentioned, are such powerful tools to have us build a connection, be educated, have awareness. Do you think it also could make us aware of the past environmental or societal or health issues to have us better prepared for any current or future crises that we're actually facing?
Mhm. Well, if you look at art history, you can look at art history also again in different ways. You can, what you said about architecture, you can look at the development of forms. You can also look at art history, development of styles, different schools, which are developed in specific regions, and so on and so on. But you can also look at how art addresses or just answers the questions a society is asking. And if you start this way, and this is a totally different way of approaching art, then you immediately get aware of that it is always a kind of interconnectiveness between arts and society.
Mm-hmm.
It was never isolated. This is ever, anytime, it is always an intense interaction between art and society. And to see how this has been or had been in the past, and how this developed, and also again looking at today's art, how they are engaged with these issues. I think this helps you to get aware of what is going on in the world.
Yeah. I guess one thing, and you did mention about indigenous societies, or just what art education might look like globally. I'm curious. It's also curious to observe. Like, it's interesting to observe that even though arts education may look different in different countries, it seems to be where, for example, if any artist or art expression comes out from usually either distressed areas or underrepresented communities, they're usually around an issue that they're facing, right? Like, you actually see a lot more almost like social activism within those artwork versus maybe in a community where you just have the education but you're living a more pleasant life with less problems, or in your perception you have no problems. So I'm also like curious to hear what you think about like how this like I guess connection to social or environmental problems naturally come out of those areas right away. Like, they don't necessarily consider maybe art shouldn't be separate from this. Like, they're all intertwined because that's their life so much there. And in other areas of the world maybe it's not necessarily the case. So that's at least our like perception or like semi observation. What do you think about this?
Um, I very much agree with you. We are doing at the moment a project with countries in Africa, which we call Exploring Visual Cultures. And this is a project we are doing with colleagues from South Africa, Ghana, Kenya, and Cameroon. And there we have a very interesting experience. What I can see from the outside is that at school or at universities, they teach Western art. But in the communities, they have a totally different culture. So they have a kind of division of what art is or what visual literacy or visual cultures are in their communities, in their families, on the one hand side, and what they are teaching at school on the other hand side. At first glance, we thought, oh, this is interesting. But then we started to reflect, is there a huge difference in what we experience in our day, also in, for instance, in Germany or in the Western countries? For if you look at our situation, I think we have a very similar thing. If you look at the visual culture in families, what they are doing there, it has nothing to do what we are teaching at school. And I think this kind of experience to work together with people in other cultures can lead us to a kind of new questioning of your own traditions, of your own cultures, of your own way of perceiving, of your own awareness. And this helps you a lot in respect to this. And to address this again from another point of view, I think, so we always talk about being aware of something. So I understand that you as an architect are mainly addressing this, but I think it's not only being aware of something. I think we have also to address more competences, more general competences. It's not only being aware, it's also about, for instance, to make good judges. What you said about coronavirus and the awareness of coronavirus is not only that you are aware of the experience of other countries, but you have also to draw conclusions from this and make judgment about what is your government, for instance, doing or not, or what is your colleague, or what am I doing? Is it the right thing? So it's also, I think, very important to draw conclusions and to make judgments. But it's not only about this. I think the third point of view is to come from this judgment. What you said is to involve action. Then it's not only just being aware of something and drawing conclusions, but also then to become active. Right. And that's what, for instance, an architect is doing as well. Is he's aware of something. He's saying this is good and this is bad. So this is about judging. But then he starts to create something. Right. And this kind of creation or just shaping our world, the situation where we are in, the circumstances we are in. So this kind of dealing with them in a creative way, by not only by responding, but really by creation. I think this is very important. Right. And I think this is the third competence which is central in any kind of education, but especially in art education. And if you are addressing, for instance, architecture or lifestyles or any kind of visual arts, and if you think of these three competences, I think then this could be a model which you can learn as a model. Right. And if you have this kind of interconnectedness between these three competences, I think if you are able to react in a specific field and you have learned this, then you can also transfer it to another field. For instance, to the health system, for instance. Yeah. Exactly. But of course, you have to be aware of it. And you really have to be aware of how it is interconnected. This kind of creation, reception, and judging.
Right. I love the fact that you mentioned like both interconnectivity, but also like almost creating more fuzziness around cultural boundaries so that we have a better understanding of how things are perceived differently, or how can we learn from one another, or like their collective knowledge on things could add on to ours. And I guess like using art as a vessel to like explore these different territories could also, as you said, be a catalyst for innovation, right? And innovation for other disciplines that are outside of arts. And I think as like, I guess like we can say creatives, right? Like designers, architects, visual artists, are backbones of like creativity is the backbone of a society to enable future, I guess, development and innovation so that we can tackle the challenges that we are raising awareness around too. So I love that you sort of tied into that, I guess, three competences. So I guess like to sort of wrap up, what would your advice be to, I guess, a student of arts education or someone who wants to get into arts education?
To your very first question, how art education can help, because I think if we focus on these three competences, and we do it in an exemplary way in a specific field, and we know that this is a kind of model how we can deal with any kind of issue. I think if you learn it also in the arts, then it helps. Then art education helps really to address these issues, what you addressed in the beginning. So perhaps this is a kind of answer to your first question, that I think art is a very good field in this broad sense, not classical art, but in this broad sense of visual culture, is a very good field where you can learn this in a kind of general behavior, how you deal with things. And if you have learned it in this specific field, I think this helps you also to transfer what you learned there, this kind of attitude or of behavior, to other fields, to any kind of fields.
Right,
so,
right.
This helps you a lot. And now answering to your question of what I advise, yeah, if you want to go into art education, I think it is just such an exciting field, because you have not only the arts like architecture, you are not only addressing the arts, but you are also addressing education, and this kind of dialogue with young people at schools or in institutions or just in communities, wherever you work as an art educator. This is the most exciting. You have this very exciting field of the visual culture on the one hand side, and you are in dialogue with people, with the next generations, and you always develop your own concepts and your own thoughts together with them. And this is so exciting, and that's why I congratulate every person who decides who wants to become an art educator.
So you encourage for them to, I guess, like to explore that dialogue, and I guess like enhance and invest in that dialogue, because that is also one of the very rich experiences of arts education itself. Okay.
And as an art teacher, you can learn so much. So you don't teach so much. It's always a kind of process of learning in a dialogue.
Right.
So the teacher always learns himself so much about what he is talking about. So it is an excellent example of how you can develop also your own personality and your own thinking in a good way in this kind of dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, self-education never ends, and I guess like creative environments are the best way to really like push for that. Thank you so much, Ernst. This was such a pleasure, and we know it was a crazy time to hold this interview too. So thank you for making the time and joining us from Germany.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. If you found value in these conversations, please like our video and hit the subscribe button. Make sure to visit our website, podcast.what'swrongwith.xyz, and subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts so you never miss an episode. Please leave us a comment or review, or you can simply tell your friends about us. For more details on our guests, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can find our handles in the description below. And don't forget to join us next week.